All right, so last time we met, we were talking about Article 4 of the Constitution, and we touched on the full faith and credit clause. Yes? That's what you should have in your notes. Okay, so remember, full faith and credit is why you can use your driver's license in any of the 49 other states. This is why contracts, licenses, and so forth transfer across state lines. Yes. Yes. And the territories. Okay. Okay, so still in Article 4 of the Constitution, the next header, okay, another clause in here that's important is the privileges and immunities. Privileges and immunities. Write that down, Braden. Braden, are you going off the track? What are you going to do all winter or all spring? Be stuck inside in the weight room.
Well, I'm going to go run. I'm going to do the workouts with my
Okay. We got any track stars in here?
Oh, yeah.
All right. Track star. Track star. Okay. There was a Saturday Night Live bid on that. Track star. I don't know if you remember that. Maybe a movie. Track star. No? Okay. Anyhow, privileges and immunities. This, guys, deals with when you travel to another state. So let's say you're driving through Nebraska. Can Nebraska treat you differently because you're from Kansas? And the answer is no, because of privileges and immunities. Okay? So you are subject to the laws of Nebraska, but they can't mistreat you because you're from another state. And why they put this in here, actually, is Hamilton that really supported this going in there. And this was also in the Articles of Confederation. But go ahead, Tristan.
I just have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Should a state choose if they built the road and it wasn't funded federally? Can they just be like, on this road you have to drive on the left side? Did they do that?
Could they?
Yeah.
Conceivably, I would see why not. That's a strange question, but okay. Do you have another one?
Sort of building off what Tristan said, if a person privately funds a road, can they decide which traffic should
You have to go first at all times.
If it's your driveway on your land, you can do whatever you want with
What
it.
if it's just a really, 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 really long driveway?
Yes.
That you make people pay you to drive on.
So how would you enforce that?
All right, please. This is going nowhere fast. Okay? Christopherson. So, when you have privileges of living in a state, okay? So, let's see here. You've got, as a resident of the state of Kansas, what can you do that somebody from Nebraska can't do?
Right on the red light.
Anyone know
Okay.
blue loss?
How about vote?
Yes.
Can Nebraskans vote in Kansas? No.
I do have a legitimate question about that.
Oh my gosh. What? You're doing math, for goodness sake.
But I'm paying attention as well. So say we went, like, when we say I went to an out-of-state school.
Yes.
Can I still participate in Kansas elections?
Yes.
Can I also participate
No.
in that? Okay. So can I choose one or the
Yes.
other? Thank you.
So if you go out of state for school, if you register, you have to register
To vote, yeah.
Yeah. So once you register in the state of Kansas, you will remain registered in the state of Kansas until you move or die or what have you. Now, if you're a student and you're going out of state, then you just get on the web and you go to absentee ballot. I mean, you just Google that, or you can go to the Secretary of State's website and request an absentee ballot, and you can continue to participate in Kansas. If you want to call where you're going to school your permanent address, then you can register in that other state. usually after a certain amount of time, 6 months generally is the case. Some states it's less than that. Some states it's 30 days.
Would they catch me if I did both?
They could catch you, and you could go to jail and pay a big fine. Okay, so you can vote in Kansas. Now, somebody that's going out of state to school or coming to Kansas to go to school from out of state, what do they have to pay? Out of state tuition. In Kansas, as a resident, you pay taxes. Your parents pay taxes. So you don't have to pay out of state tuition, but people that don't pay taxes in the state, and the state helps fund our public universities and so forth, you get to pay in-state tuition. Okay? Now, how long do you have to go to school to get in-state tuition? You have to move there? I mean, you're already living there, right? You know, Michael, that's what I thought. When I moved here in December of 1995, I registered at Wichita State University to go back to school to become a teacher. I was 27 years old. And in January, I just registered at Wichita State, knew I was going to pay out of state tuition. And I did for that first year. And so I went to register for school again in January of 97. And they said, you have to pay out of state. I'm like, whoa, wait a second. Why would I move here from Louisiana to get a Kansas teaching license to take it back to Louisiana where it's not valid? What gives? You know, this is an institution of higher learning, Wichita State University, correct? At least that's what they say. So I go through the appeals process and try to explain to them, okay, I'm staying in Kansas. I'm working 20, 25 hours, going to school full time, and you want to charge me out of state tuition. That's wrong. And they said, sorry, you lose. And I said, sorry, I'm leaving. And I finished at Newman. Out of spite. I paid about $30 more a credit hour at the private institution, Newman, but Wichita State didn't get my money.
Sure shows at your own expense.
Yeah.
Give it to the man.
Stick it to the man. You know what else I did? I was pissed because I'm not a resident. Okay, I'm not a resident. So I left my Florida tags on my vehicle for like 3 more years. Because, guys, when you register your tags in this state, it's based on the value of your automobile. And it can be expensive. But in Florida, it's like $45. So I said, hey, Dad, renew my plates for me, would you? Okay? And sure. So I actually started working at Bishop Carroll, and I still have my Florida tags. And people are like, why do you have Florida tags? Well, let me tell you a story. Okay?
I drive to Florida every day.
Yes. But it's insane. Come on. But they lost me. They lost a good student. Now, the sad part of the story is when I wanted to work on my master's, Newman and Friends don't offer history degrees, and so I had to go crawling back to Wichita State.
So wait, how long did it take a citizen?
Yeah.
I don't know in Kansas. For Wichita State. But
Are you not a citizen yet?
You're not a citizen?
no, I'm a resident. I've been voting here for a long time. So anyhow, privileges and immunities. Okay. Now, one part of this, one kind of side note with this is, what happens? Let's say you rob a liquor store in Wichita, and you run from the cops and you flee to Missouri. Can the state troopers follow you into Missouri?
Yes.
It's out of their jurisdiction.
They can follow you, they can't arrest you in Missouri. Okay, and they can call ahead to Missouri and say, hey, we're chasing this guy that's wanted for armed robbery. Now, if the Missouri police pull you over and detain you, they can't just drive you back to the state line and hand you over. There's a process, and it's called extradition. Okay? Now, let's say you committed murder in a state,
Murder is legal.
first degree murder. Tristan, shut up. No, it's not funny. I think they're laughing at my reaction because what he said really wasn't funny. All right, Tristan, next wisecrack, illegitimate, stupid comment, you're going to the hallway.
Take his cow book away from him.
Yeah,
I don't know, it might get worse. Okay. Some states have the death penalty, some states don't. Okay, so let's say you committed murder in a death penalty state, and you fled to a state where there's no death penalty. See, what happens is the governor of the state where the crime was committed has to call the governor of the other state and ask for that person to be extradited. Well, conceivably, the governor and say they're very passionately against the death penalty, conceivably he could say, I'll give him back if you promise not to charge him with the death penalty. Otherwise, I'm not going to extradite him. Now, we have extradition treaties with countries around the world. In Canada, there was a case where somebody was wanted for murder from California who has the death penalty, believe it or not. And Canada would not extradite unless they promised not to seek the death penalty. Okay. Now, if you commit a heinous murder and you want to flee to a country where we don't have an extradition treaty with, okay, you'd be better off in a U.S. prison with 3 meals a day, cable TV, a library, and everything else we provide for our inmates, than living in, say, Iran or North Korea that we don't have extradition treaties with. But if you're really thinking about it, you can look that up online and see which countries we don't have extradition treaties with. Yeah.
So we'll call ahead and tell them that this person did these things, but you don't necessarily have to arrest them then?
It's usually a courtesy. You know, if somebody's wanted, there's a warrant on somebody. Yeah.
Okay, so let's say if the state doesn't want to extradite, can they still hold a trial in their state? Oh, so like if they
don't have jurisdiction, and
so if the government doesn't if the other government doesn't play ball, some guy can just go free.
Yep.
Ooh.
Is there a time limit for that guy? Can they hold him for
Statute of limitations.
Statute.
If you stay in that state, conceivably, guys, they're going to extradite.
Well, it's there's no statute of limitations.
Really, the point's moot. Okay. Next thing. Also in Article 4, we went from 13 states to now 50 states. Article 4 discusses the process of a territory becoming a state. Okay? Does anybody remember, you learned this last year in junior history. How many people have to live in a territory in order for it to become a state? 60,000. Okay. So, what we're going to require the territory to do, okay, is what's called an enabling act, okay, where they have to write a constitution with a Republican, that's a P, or a representative government. So let's take Puerto Rico, which is a territory. Did you have a question, Alex? Already?
No, so which article is this?
This is still in Article 4.
So it's 4.2?
Yeah, 4.3. Yeah, because you had full faith, credit, privileges, and immunities. Okay, so once that territory writes a constitution with the Republican form of government. So, like Kansas, we have state legislature, Topeka. We have a House and a Senate that people get to elect. It's a Republican form of government. Okay? Now, every 49 of the 50 states have a bicameral legislature, state legislature. One state has a unicameral. And you guys know this is a great trivia question. No? Nebraska. Nebraska is the only state that has a unicameral legislature, and Mrs. Lovelace's grandfather served in it. Okay? Now, originally Pennsylvania only had a unicameral, but they changed to a bicameral. Okay? So, once your territory writes this Constitution, the Congress can look at it and prove it. Okay? And then they will pass what's called an Act of Admission, bringing the state or the territory into statehood. So, Puerto Rico. In the 80s, they had a vote of the people of Puerto Rico, whether to join or not. And they voted narrowly not to join, or asked to join. I would say today, it's more likely that Puerto Rico become a state than in any time in recent history. They've had some really bad financial problems, even before the hurricane. So since the hurricane, their economy is devastated. So there are privileges that come with statehood. So I wouldn't be surprised to see that in the near future, a move by Puerto Rico to try and become a state. Okay? Which I know would make the flag look weird because adding a star. Huh?
50 just sounds so nice.
Yeah, 50 is just such an even number.
We'll just have to get rid of California.
Well, we could split California and make it 52.
That's a nice number. I like that. I even get rid of them.
Let's just make it into 55. Push them
No,
off.
we split it.
Well, Mother Nature may take care of that for us.
Why don't we just split Wyoming among all these neighboring states?
Annex Canada?
I was in Puerto Rico 2 years ago before the hurricane.
Annex Canada?
We did a cruise that took off from Puerto Rico, so we flew into Puerto Rico and then took the cruise out, spent a day there. It's a beautiful place. We were in San Juan. And they've got some really cool history there. The old forts there, they're huge. It's just gorgeous. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to ask if you saw the forts.
Yeah.
It's all very, very cool.
Yeah, I talked to the park ranger there for a while. It was good stuff. Okay. All right, so that's the process of statehood. Now, there are certain obligations that the federal government has to the states, okay, that are talked about. Because remember, this is interstate and federal relations. So there are certain obligations that the federal government has to the states. For instance, the federal government is supposed to protect the states from invasion. And help with the domestic violence if necessary. I already mentioned this, but guaranteeing a Republican form of government in your states, okay, for the people. So we get to elect our leaders in the state, okay. And third would be respect for territorial integrity. Territorial integrity. Meaning that the federal government cannot change the borders of your state without that state's permission. Now, the one that always comes up here is people like to talk about, people that like history and stuff, is West Virginia. Virginia was a much larger state than it is today on the eve of the Civil War. When Virginia seceded from the Union went ahead and said, we're going to go ahead and break that state up and create West Virginia without their permission. They didn't need it. Huh? Yeah, so, right, so they took it and broke it up. Yep.
Was Kansas a territory when they broke it into Colorado? Or were we a state?
I don't know. I don't teach that part of history.
Kansas was the original.
Kansas was huge.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know if we gave them permission
They just took it.
or yeah, they would have. I mean, constitutionally, they would have had to get our permission to do it. If it was still a territory, I think they probably did it before they made it a state. They broke it up, I would imagine.
I think they broke it up during the Gold Rush.
Okay. All right. That covers Article 4. Okay. Moving on to Article 5 of the Constitution. And we've already talked about this to some extent, quite a bit actually. When I went to Topeka for the So, Article 5 discusses the amendment process. There are two ways to propose a constitutional amendment. There are two ways to ratify a constitutional amendment. Yep, Article 5. Okay, so we've already discussed this. So you got to have 2/3 of Congress. That means both houses to propose an amendment. Okay, getting 2/3 of either house to agree on anything is difficult. Or you can get 2/3 2/3 of the states to propose a national convention of the states. And this is what I went up to Topeka for. And that was to try and get Kansas to agree to send delegates to a national convention of the states for the purposes of amending the Constitution. Okay? This has never been done. So all 27 of the 27 amendments have been proposed by Congress. 0 of the 27 have been proposed through this manner. But it's there for a reason. Because if you're proposing limits on Congress, like term limits, you wouldn't expect them. Or what if you said something like this to Congress? You passed a constitutional amendment that Congress will be subject to the same laws as the laws they pass on the rest of the people. Like, for instance, Obamacare. How many congressmen would have voted for it if all the Congress people had to sign up for Obamacare and not get a special medical package through their job with Congress? Okay, 2 ways to ratify. You need 3/4 of the states. State legislatures. Now, it would just have to pass as a majority vote in the state Senate and the state House of Kansas. Okay? That's 38 states, 3/4 of the states. 2/3 here is 34 states. Right now, 12 states have promised to send delegates to a national convention. Only 12. Okay, and that bill that I went up there for in the Senate Committee, Foreign Relations or Federal Relations Committee, it did make it out of committee, and so it will be sent to the full Kansas Senate for a vote. See what happens. Now, 3/4 of state conventions. Okay? Now, 26 of the 27 amendments have been ratified through the first man. Okay? Only 1 of the 27 has been ratified by state conventions. Did I tell you guys what it was? Which one? Yeah, the repeal of prohibition, 21st Amendment. So, you can do any combination here, guys. You could do this, you could do this, you could do this, you could do this. Okay? Which is the most common way? Obviously this one. Right? That's the most common way to pass an amendment. Is it easy to pass a constitutional amendment? No. It's only happened 17 times since 1791. The first 10 were the Bill of Rights that were ratified together in 1791. Okay? 17 times. This Article 5 of the Constitution is one of the most brilliant parts of the Constitution. I don't know if you guys know this or not. But the U.S. Constitution, Christo, the U.S. Constitution is the longest surviving Constitution in the world today. Over 230 years. Every other country in the world has written a new Constitution since ours was written. Every country in the world. Do you guys know that? This is the brilliance of the document. You don't have to rewrite the whole Constitution to change it. You can amend it without changing the basics of the Constitution. Okay? That's the amendment process. Now that's on page 53 in your book. This explains it a little bit easier. In layman's terms, if you will. Okay, that's Article 5. Article 6. Article 6 deals with federal supremacy. In Article 6, you will find the Supremacy Clause. And basically what it says, guys, is the U.S. Constitution and federal laws trump state constitution and state laws. So federal law and the U.S. Constitution are supreme. In fact, the U.S. Constitution is the supreme law of the land. What's the supreme law of the land? The U.S. Constitution. Okay?
Oh.
Sorry. Look at you guys for a little bit. Article 7 of the Constitution. What are you looking at?
It sounds like a wise
Yeah,
to
it
me.
sounds like one.
Wisecrack.
9 of the 13 states must ratify in order for this to become the law of the land. 9 of the 13 must ratify in order for this to become the law of the land. And that's it. There's your 7 articles of the U.S. Constitution. Okay? It's a very short document, guys. Now, sometimes we don't know or really understand the details of the Constitution because there are no details. So in the Constitution it says that the President, the Vice President, and federal judges can be impeached for high crimes and misdemeanors. Misdemeanors. Jaywalking, traffic speeding tickets are misdemeanors. You're going to impeach the President for that?
Yeah.
Does the president really drive?
Not much. Maybe a golf cart.
Maybe.
President gets drunk. On the main road.
How do we know what that means? Well, there's a group of papers that were written in support of the Constitution called the Federalist Papers. And if I turn to the index, which my copy has an index, and I go to I for impeachment, I can find references to the impeachment process on page 242, page 396 through 407, page 416, 464, 474, 482, 485, and 511. What this tells me is that impeachment is referenced in no less than 4 different Federalist Papers. Okay? This fills in the gaps of what they meant. When John Jay became the first Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court, because he had no power, of judicial review, there was a judge named John Marshall that thought that they did have that review power. And they used the Federalist Papers to explain that. And since 1803, the Supreme Court has become this behemoth of power because of the Federalist Papers. On page 46 in your book, page 44 in your book, I have a series of Federalist Papers in your book, beginning with number 1, written by Alexander Hamilton, or Publius. Okay? And then on the next page, I have Federalist number 2 by John Jay. John Jay only wrote 5 of the 85. The rest were written by Hamilton and Madison. Okay? Then, Federalist number 10, which is maybe the most discussed Federalist paper of all 85, number 10. Then Federalist number 51, 54, and 78, which discusses the Supreme Court. Okay? So, tonight, your job is to read those. Highlight, underline, put a star next to anything that you think is significant in these papers. Tomorrow we're going to discuss them. We'll do, hey, what's the major theme of this document, of this paper? And then we'll expand upon that. And then some of the papers we'll dig into a little bit more than others, okay? Because they have greater significance. And are still having significance today. James Madison can teach us a lot today. And there's a lot of people in this country that need to read this. Okay? So, please, I implore you, I only ask you to do this a couple times a year. Okay? To read this. And let's have a good discussion about it tomorrow, Tristan. Okay? All right. Next. What I want to kind of do is set you up for what we got the rest of the week. We have, tomorrow we'll discuss the Federalist Papers. And then Wednesday we have an extended schedule. So we're going to start, have a little exercise we'll do in class on how to, to learn the 27 amendments. Okay? We're going to learn all 27 amendments. You already know several of them. Okay? So you're not going to have to learn 27. You'll probably have to learn like 22. Okay. Then that'll bleed into Thursday. Then I still have to talk about federalism. Michael.
Yes.
What is federalism?
The sharing/distribution of power between local government and national government.
It's pretty good.
Local state.
Well, you could do all three. Central and regional government. Different ways you can say it. Okay, so that'll take at least a day. And then a little bit more on what we call checks and balances, separation of powers. Okay, that we find in the Constitution that are very important to it. Okay, so that being said, I'm looking at probably Tuesday, next Tuesday, for your second test. Okay, I don't think I can get it in Friday. Okay, good. So we're in pretty good shape here. So this is where I left off with the other class. So you have a little bit of time now if you want to work on your Federalist Papers or math. Be sure to like, subscribe, and comment.
Yeah.